We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara from Meseches Sukkah. This is Sukkah Daf 11b. The Gemara over here says Shmuel's chiddush in saying that if you have one thread, you put it through two corners, then you cut it and then you tie it. What's the chiddush? If you're tying it after it's two threads, it seems obvious. So the Gemara says no. But inon knaf b'shas psil v'leka. You might have thought you need to have the corner, one corner at the time of threading, and you don't have that requirement. Kamash Malon. That's what Shmuel's teaching us, that that's not required. Rashi over here says, but inon knaf b'shas psil b'shah sheposlo shetola bo hapsilim. At the time that you're putting the threads through the corners of the garment, but inon knaf echad v'lo shnaim. You might think that at that moment already you need it to be one corner, not two. In this case, he was threading it through two corners at once. So that's why Shmuel said you might have thought that would be a problem, and Shmuel's teaching you it's not a problem. And the Gemara continues, Meisra, we have a question from a Brisa. The Brisa says, Telon velo pasak rashi chutin shalahen. Again, let's say he hung the threads by tzitzis, but he didn't cut the threads. Psulin, it is pasul. So the Gemara draws an inference. Ma'ilaf psulin liolam. Doesn't it mean to say that it's pasul forever? You can't simply cut it and make it kosher. Utiyuf to the Rav. This would seem to be a refutation against Rav. Again, Rav said, Kitzitzason zuhi asiyason. If you cut something, or psikason, if you cut the threads, that's going to be considered the asiyah. Here, apparently, it's psulin liolam. So the Gemara says, no, Amar Lach Rav. Rav will say to you, my psulin ad sheyifsuku. He'll interpret the Brisa that it means it's pasul until you cut it. But once you cut it, it's going to be okay. Well, Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says psulin liolam. The Brisa means to say it's pasul forever. Again, Shmuel holding that psikasan is not considered the asiyah, cutting it is not considered the asiyah. V'chein Amar Levi, and similarly Levi says psulin liolam, it's pasul forever. V'chein Amar Rav Masna Amar Shmuel, and also Rav Masna says the same thing in the name of Shmuel, psulin liolam, it is pasul forever. Gemara says Iko di Amri. Some have a slightly different version of what was just said. Amar Rav Masna, what Rav Masna said was as follows. B'didi hava uvda. I had a case myself. V'yasai l'kami de Mar Shmuel, and I came in front of Mar Shmuel. V'amarli, he said to me, psulin liolam, it is pasul forever. Same basic idea, just a different version of how he's quoting Shmuel. So the Gemara says, Meisve, we have a question from another Brisa. To lon v'achakach pasak roshe chutin shalahen psulin. Brisa says if you put the threads into the corners of the garment and then only afterwards you cut the threads, it is pasul. V'yo tanya, and furthermore we learned in a Brisa. So that again, that's a clear question on Rav, saying that cutting it is not okay. V'yo tanya, and further we learned in a Brisa, gabe sukkah, when it comes to sukkah, ta'aseh v'lomina aseh. Again, the sukkah has to be made. There has to be an asiyah. It can't just be made on its own. Mikan amrun. From here they say hidlo les hagefen v'esadalas v'esakisos. If the person takes some vines, or he takes some gourd, or he takes some ivy, and he puts that over the roof, v'sikech al gabon, and he puts the schach on top, psul, it's pasul. So the Gemara now says on this Brisa, hechi dami. What exactly is the case over here? Ilema b'shalo katzitzon. If the case over here is that he hasn't cut the gefen and the dalas and the kisos, so in such a case, ma'irya mishum tasav v'lomin asoi. What is the Brisa bringing up the issue of tasav v'lomin asoi? Typically, the mechubarin, and it would just say that it's attached to the ground. Clearly, you must have cut it. Ela b'shakatzitzon. Obviously, the Brisa is talking about a case where you actually cut the gefen, where you actually cut the dalas, you cut the kisos, the katani psul, and it's still saying it's possible because of tasav v'lomin asoi. Ushma aminon, you see from this Brisa, delo aminon kitzitzason zui asiyason, that we don't say that cutting it is considered an asiyah. Utiyufta de Rav, and it seems to be a refutation of Rav. So the Gemara answers, Amar lach Rav. Rav will say to you, Hacha b'mayaskinan deshalfinu shalufe. The case over here is not that he cut it, but that he pulled it in order to detach it from the ground. Delo minkara asiyah ditu. When you do that, even though you're detaching it from the ground, it's not minkara. It's not recognizable that you did anything, and therefore you would think it's pasul. So that's why it's saying in such a situation that actually is a problem of tasav v'lomin ha'asui. But if you would actually cut it, that would be okay. But the Gemara says, Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Telon v'achakach pasa kasha l'Rav. That first Brisa you quoted by Tzitzis, which says even when you cut the threads, it's still going to be a problem. That is a kasha for Rav. And the Gemara says, kasha, you're right, that is indeed a question against Rav. Rashi over here says, the shalfinu shalufe, this is Rav's answer, that the case where it is a problem of tasa v'lomin asui is the shalfinu shalufe, when you pull in order to detach. Pashchan mino ilan acheniskan, you pull them from the tree until it detaches. Umitochshen kitzitzasan nikeres kolkach, and you can't really tell that it's cut from the tree. Because it's all sitting right next to the tree. So lo have asiyah ma'aliyah. That's not called a real asiyah. That's how Rav answered again the case by Sukkah, but there was no answer for the Brisa when it came to tzitzis. And the Gemara continues, let's say this issue is a machlokas tanoim. Avar v'likton, if he transgressed and he picked the berries by the hadas, and we'll take a look at Rashi in a moment. Pasul, it's going to be pasul. Divri Rabbi Shimon bar Yehotzadok. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yehotzadok. The Chachamim machshir, and the Chachamim say that it's kosher in such a case. So Rashi over here says, Ketanoi yamrinon ketzitzason zuhi asiyason olo. Let us say it's a machlokas tanoim whether cutting is considered asiya or not. We had here a machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Let's say it's actually a machlokas tanoim. Avar v'likton. So inve hahadas. We're talking here about the berries that are part of the hadasim. We're talking about the hadasim that you take on sukkahs. The tanan l'kamon. We learned in a mishnah later on. Im hayu anav of merubin me'olav. If you have more berries than leaves, puzzle. So in such a situation, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be a kosher hadas. To have a menumar, that's called menumar v'lo haderhu. That's not called hader. It's not a beautiful hadas. V'yamiyato kosher. Now, if you take off the berries, then it's going to be kosher. V'yein mematin b'yomtiv. However, on yomtiv itself, you're not allowed to take off the berries. The mesakin mona lahachshir sapsol. That's called tikun mona because you're taking something that's really possible and you're turning it into something kosher on yomtiv. V'katani b'braisa avar al divrei chachamim. So the braisa is saying as follows. Let's say he transgressed. That's what it means, avar in the braisa. He transgressed on what the chachamim say. She'amru ein mematin b'yontiv. They say you're not allowed to take off the berries on yontiv. V'likton b'yontiv, and then he went ahead and did it anyway on yontiv. So pasul. So in that situation, it's going to be pasul. That was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yotzadok. And the chachamim say no. Even though you transgressed, you violated yontiv, and you took off the berries, the hadassim themselves are still going to be kosher. So the question is, what is the issue? What is the machlokas tanoim over here? So the Gemara says, Savru, right now we think, the kuliyal lulav tzarech eged. Everybody agrees that lulav requires to be bound together, meaning you have to take the lulav and the hadassim and the aravos and bind them together. That's part of the mitzvah. That's what we think right now. Now, if you hold it's tzarech eged, that means there's an asiyah here. You're doing something to create your bundle of your lulav and your hadassim and your aravos. V'yalfin and lulav misuk, and also we learn out lulav from sukkah. D'chsiv gabe sukkah ta'aseh v'lo min asui. By sukkah we know the halachas you have to make it. There has to be an asiyah. It can't be made on its own. So too, there has to be a real asiyah when it comes to the lulav. So my lab, so the Gemara says, is it not? This is exactly the machlokas over here. The one who says it's kosher, he holds by sukkah that cutting is considered an asiyah. And by lulav also it'll be the same thing. Taking the berries off, that's considered an asiyah. So therefore, that's why it's kosher. And the one who says pasul, he holds lo amrinan gabe sukkah ketzitzas zui asiyas. And we don't say by sukkah that cutting is considered an asiyah. The gabe lulav nami, and so the same thing is going to be true by lulav. Lo amrinan likitas zui asiyas. And we don't say that taking off the berries is considered an asiyah. That's exactly the same machlokas tanoim. So the Gemara says not necessarily. Lo, no. It could be that everybody agrees by sukkah the ketzitza is not considered an asiyah. And here maybe they're just arguing whether we learn lulav from sukkah. The one who says it's kosher, he says we don't learn lulav from sukkah, so therefore it's not an issue at all. There's no din of tasa v'lo min ha'asih by lulav. And the one who says it's pasul holds that we do learn lulav from sukkah, so you need a real asiyah, and that's why it's a problem. Gemara gives another answer. If you want, I can say another approach. If we actually held that the binding was required by lulav, everyone would agree it would be a problem here, because we learn out lulav from sukkah, you need a real asiyah. But here the machlokas is as follows. One of the opinions holds you need to bind it together, therefore it's a problem here, because you need an asiyah, and taking the berries off is not an asiyah. The other one says there's no asiyah needed anyway, because you don't need to bind the lulav together with the hadassim and the aravos. And the Gemara says this is actually a machlokas tanoim we have somewhere else. The Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, lulav bein agud bein she'eno agud kosher. The Tanakhama says when it comes to lulav, whether it's bound or whether it's not bound, it's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda says agud kosher she'eno agud pasul. You need to have it bound, only then it's kosher. If it's not bound, then it's going to be pasul. The Gemara says, "My time of the Rabbi Yehuda." What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Yolif lakicha me'agudas ezov. He learns out the word lakicha. It says over here by lulav lakicha, and it also says by agudas ezov. That's talking about the bundle of hyssop that they had when they brought the korban pesach in Mitzrayim. So they had to put the blood on the doorposts. So part of that involved a bundle over there of the hyssop, of the ezov. So ksiv hasamu lakachtem agudas ezov. It says over there by the korban pesach in Mitzrayim. It says lakachtem. Ksiv hachan. It says over here lakachtem lochem by Yom Rishon says the same word, lakachtem malahalan ba'aguda, just like over there it's talking about something in a bundle, afkanami ba'aguda. So too over here it's talking about bundling it. You have to bundle the lulav together with the hadassim and the aravos. And the Gemara says, "V'rabbanan lakicha mi lakicha lo yalfinan." The Rabbanan say we don't make such a gezerah shava lakicha from lakicha. The Gemara says, Kemanos lahadatanya. Now, who is the author of the following brisa? The brisa says, Lulav mitzvah la'ogdo. It says, by a lulav, it's a mitzvah l'chatzchila to bind it. V'im lo ogdo kosher, but if you don't bind it, it's still kosher. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, if you're going to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, ki lo agdo amai kosher. If you don't bind it, why should it be kosher? Rabbi Yehuda has a gezerah shava that there's a requirement of binding. Rabbanan, and if it's the Rabbanan, amai mitzvah, why is there a mitzvah l'chatchila to bind it if you have no source for such a mitzvah? They don't have the gezerah shava. So the Gemara says, Liolam Rabbanon, it is the Rabbanon. Umishum shenemar zakeli v'anveyu. It says in the pasuk zakeli v'anveyu. We learn out from that pasuk hisnoel lefanav b'mitzvahs. A person has to beautify in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu the mitzvahs. So according to the Rabbanon, the reason why you would have to bind the lulav is not because it's learned out from the pasuk, but simply because it is a way, a lechatchila way at least, of beautifying the mitzvah. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Za'aklal kol davar shemekabel tumah v'chulu. It said the rule is, if you have something, the only thing that's kosher v'schach is a situation where it's not mekabel tumah, and it grows from the ground. So the Gemara says, Mino hanimili, how do you know this? Amar Reish Lakish says, Amar Krakas, the pasuk says, V'eid yalim in ha'aretz, the mist, it rose from the ground, Ma'eid davar she'eno mekabel tumah, just like the mist is something that is not mekabel tumah, v'gidulam in ha'aretz, and it grows from the ground. Av sukkah, so too, sukkah, davar she'en mekabel tumah, the schach has to be something that's not mekabel tumah, v'gidulam in ha'aretz, and it has to grow from the ground. Rashi over here explains, V'eid yalim in ha'aretz, this is in Bereshis, it says that the mist rose from the ground, Shma mina anonim gidulei karka ninu. What the point over here is that the clouds, the mist is like clouds, that's considered something that grows from the ground. Yalim in ha'aretz. V'sukkah me'anonim yalfinan. And sukkah is learned out from the clouds of glory, sharei zecher la'anani ha'kavod, because again, it's a remembrance of the anani ha'kavod in the midbar. Kedechsiv, like the pasuk says, kivas sukkos hoshafti. It says that Klal Yisrael, they dwelled in the sukkahs in the midbar. U'mitargaminan arei v'matlos anani. And what does it say in the Targum? It says that's a reference to the clouds. So therefore, we learn out that the aid, the clouds, the mist, is something that grows from the ground, and it's not mekabel tumah. So too when it comes to the schach, which is like the anani ha'kavod, it's the same halacha. So the Gemara says, Hanich lemandavar anani ha'kavod hayu. That's good according to the position that says, according to the opinion that says, that the sukkos in the pasuk in the midbar were the anani ha'kavod. Elo lemandamar sukkos mamish. But according to the one who says that it really refers to sukkah, meaning they actually built huts to protect themselves while they were camping from the sun, sukkos mamish asulam, they made for themselves sukkos mamish. Ma'ikol lememar, what are you going to say over here? In other words, where are you going to learn this requirement? As Rashi says, miyomer lanu shalohayu mesuchachos bekelim uvegadim. We don't know what kind of huts they made. Maybe they used vessels, maybe they used clothing, maybe they used hides. How do you know the requirements for what is needed for the mitzvah of sukkah? And so the Gemara says, the Tanya, because we learned in a brayso, ki basukos hoshafti es b'nei Yisrael. It says again in the pasuk that Klal Yisrael in the midbar was in Sukkos. Anane kavod hayu divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says it's anane kavod. Rabbi Akiva omer sukkos mamish, and Rabbi Akiva says that it's sukkos mamish asul lahem, that they really made actual huts in the midbar. So again, the Gemara reiterates the question: Hanichol Rabbi Eliezer, El Rabbi Akiva, Ma'ikol Meimer. Everything makes sense according to Rabbi Eliezer, but what are you going to say according to Rabbi Akiva? According to Rabbi Akiva, if they were in actual huts in the midbar, how do we know that the sukkos that we use now have to be not mekabel tumah and gedulam in aretz? And so the Gemara answers, Ki yasser Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Krok, because the pasuk says, Chag hasukos tasel l'cho. It says you're going to make the Chag hasukos makish sukkah l'chagiga. It has the word Chag over here, so we make a comparison, a hekesh between the sukkah and the carbon chagiga. Ma chagiga davar sheino mekabel tumah v'gidulam in aretz. Just like the carbon chagiga is something that's not mekabel tumah and it grows from the ground. And Rashi will discuss this. Av sukkah, so too sukkah davar sheino mekabel tumah v'gidulam in aretz. It has to be something that's not mekabel tumah and it grows from the ground. Rashi over here says, Ki chagiga kol behemel Rabbi Yochanan gidulei karkahen. According to Rabbi Yochanan's understanding, animals also are considered growing from the ground. Shemin hakarka gedelim v'nizonim, because they get their sustenance from the ground. Aval dagim v'melach ukmein upitrios. Rabbi Yochanan would say fish or salt or mushrooms or things like that. Lav gidulei karkaninu. That would not be considered growing from the ground because they're not getting their sustenance from the ground. V'gavi meiser karinan luhula behemos gidulei karka. Rashi points out that also by the halachas of meiser we find that animals are called gidulei karka. The pasuk says v'nasata kesef b'chol asher ta'ava nafshecha ma'aprav first pri v'gidulei karka talks about using the kesef of meiser sheni. You have to buy things that are gidulei karka, and that's a reference to the animals. But Rashi says this is not going to be true in the conclusion. Umiu, nevertheless, in the end, Rabbi Yochanan is not going to, we're going to refute Rabbi Yochanan. There's going to be a question that we're going to have on Rabbi Yochanan's limud. We're going to learn from a different pasuk, from Garnacha and Mikvecha. So therefore, at the end, we don't hold like this, that you're allowed to have schach with, let's say, the hides of an animal. Even though if you just had this Gemara, you would think that animal hide coming from an animal is gedulei karka would be kosher for schach. We don't hold like that. Rashi says, granted that they're called gedulei haaretz because they get sustenance from the earth. Aval gedulei min haaretz lo ikri. They're not called gedulei min haaretz. They don't grow from the ground. They're gedulei haaretz, but not gedulei min haaretz. Eladavar hatzomeach min akarka v'lo behemos. It has to be something that actually grows from the ground, not animals. The Tanya Basochar Sapolim, we learned about Mitzia, Poalim Ochlim, Bedavar Shagidulam and Aretz, Vigamar Milosachsum Shabadisho, Madayish Miucha Davar Shagidulam and Aretz, Vachulu, Yatza Acholiv, Amachavitz, Megabin, Amalav Gidulam and Aretz, Karilu Tana. You see, even over there in Bab Mitzia, when they talk about Gidulam min haaretz, they're specifically saying it has to grow from the ground. It would not include animals. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph.